Good.
I'd like to invite everybody to our LinkedIn Live. We're live and in color today with Quinn Agen, who leads the Omilia sales organization, a all-in-one customer service solution. We're going to talk a little bit about that. I'm Tom Lewis from TTEC Digital. We advise clients on all aspects of customer experience and have a great opportunity to meet with some of the leaders of the industry. And so Quinn, as I said a moment ago, good afternoon. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good, Tom. How are you?
Fantastic. We're not going to talk a lot about either TTEC or Omilia, but I do have, some from a headline perspective, just for context. Omilia's solution is a conversational voice and chat capability. It also has some embedded security components. It has conversational insights, agent assist, et cetera. It's pretty comprehensive from that standpoint. A lot of it enabled by AI. So let me start with a question around how you are seeing customers react to the advent of generative AI and importantly, what their inhibitions are, what their risks, concerns are, things like that. Just hit some of the high notes around that, if you would.
Yeah, for sure. So I think definitely we're in an exciting time, right? The term AI was used, long before, the onset of Chat GPT and other large language models. But I think, certainly there's been a huge shift in the market over the last couple of years. I would say principally driven by the exposure that the average consumer has had to these types of technologies, whereas before they were not as attainable for the average citizen. And with that, the expectation, right, of your average consumer has certainly gone up when it comes to what they are expecting when it comes to automated or AI-based experiences. So I think, what we're seeing in the market is really an effect of that in the enterprise, where enterprises are sort of forced to, really take the next step from an AI perspective because their consumers are demanding it. They know that there are technologies out there that, can understand them and allow them to speak, truly freely and really get as much done as you would with a human agent, or a human associate, and to do so in a way that is not cumbersome. You don't have to repeat yourself. And so I think ultimately, there's one piece which is the consumer expectations, right? But I think the other piece of it is the economics. So obviously, there's always a drive, right, from the top down to to decrease operating costs from an overall operations perspective. Certainly from a servicing perspective, there's always pressure there. And with inflation and the price and the cost of salaries going up, right, there's even more pressure there from a cost perspective. And then when we have these conversations, we talk a lot about the consumer and the customer and providing a great delightful customer experience. But we also need to be talking about the employees, right? It's not only necessarily about taking out the human resource costs. It's about repositioning those human resources to do different things that add more value to the company and to the customer, right? And so if you have a more advanced AI, then you're able to alleviate a lot of that sort of redundant, repetitive, cognitive load on human agents, making them really more valuable resources inside the organization. So I think it's a number of those things that are really sort of contributing to the heat that's on right now.
Yeah, and that made me think of a lot of questions. I got to figure out which one to hit first because there's a lot to unpack there. I'm working with a client now that is trying to build a business case, and you touched on sort of both sides of the coin relative to the cost. Because on the one hand, if you can get customers to confidently and enjoyably use self-service, fantastic. But on the other hand, there is somewhat of an upskill and a cost associated with keeping those things current, and so they don't atrophy. How do you talk to clients about that component of and how they should think about putting their business case together? Because historically it was, yeah, just automate it and then you won't need the agents. And I think it's more complicated than that now.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, at its core, that's still, I think the juxt of it, but there's a couple different pieces at play, right? As you said, the main piece is, how many interactions can we service the customer without requiring, a human to get involved, whether that's a voice interaction or a chat interaction, right? Regardless of the channel, maybe it's email, for example, right? But to your point, there's also, even the cost of, even if it goes to the human, right? How do we make the cost of the human interaction less, right? They still need to go to a human, but how do we improve the efficiency around that interaction? That's a whole nother piece of it. And as you said, the cost and the cost of time when it comes to onboarding new resources. I know a lot of customers of ours struggle with employee churn, right? And so, getting new agents into the contact center and ramped up in a faster amount of time, getting them to, deliver the right answers to the customer faster. That is also driving the business case, right? So, a lot of the conversation does center around, containment and mitigation. We like to refer to it as fulfillment because it sort of, gives a more, positive ring to automation, right? At the end of the day, we do want to fulfill the customers, but in a positive way. And so, when it comes to the employee experience, how are we able to, fast track them to becoming the best call center agents, right, on the team? And it's even for those calls that are contained, providing the information to the agent without the agent having to go and search, right, in a knowledge base, just having the information sort of passively and proactively, pushed to the agent desktop so that they, again, are getting the right answers fast in the moment, and being able to, respond to customer inquiries without having to say, hey, please hold, I got to talk to my manager, or give me a second while I look that up.
Well, and so I think that answer, I'm going to sort of extrapolate part of my question before, because one of the other things that we're often facing is that the client comes into this conversation thinking, all right, what can I automate and what can I automate?
Right.
And we are often, when we sort of analyze what they're working, what the spectrum of possibilities are, there's a number of them that can be partially automated.
Yep.
And I guess my question for you is, do you think that that part of the equation of trying to figure out what can be partially automated versus not is different today with the AI capabilities versus the way we've thought about that traditionally? I mean, there's two parts to it, right? One is you always forget that, and you're like, no, we need to put that on the truck too. Yeah. And number two is, I think the dynamic's changing.
Yeah, well, you're right. I did forget it, because that was the other piece that I wanted to talk to, right? Is it's not only either it's contained or not, but how much of the workload can we take off of the human before it needs to get to the human, right? And, again, with the advances in speech to text and natural language understanding, we do have the power to take as much weight off of the human agent up front before that call ultimately gets transferred, right? So things like, building a profile around a new user, or collecting information like a change of address or something. So again, sort of more of the, I'll say, mundane types of questions, right, that agents or humans are normally needing to collect around customers, ultimately to service their request, right? But even if we can collect, 25, 50, 75% of the information that ultimately the human agent is going to need to complete that fulfillment, that's cost savings right there, right? So it's also, going back to the time is money thing. How much time can we save the agent? How much can we bring forward in that that customer journey to ultimately, again, give the agent the information they need when they get the call, and eliminate the need for them to have to, again, do a lot of the sort of repetitive, collection, info gathering type of tasks over the phone. Even a great example of that is authentication, right? We know a lot of customers that struggle with authentication. There can be human to human authentication times of upwards of 2 minutes, and that's a lot of time on the phone, right? So even being able to authenticate the customer in a secure way, perhaps with voice biometrics, for example, is also one of those things that it drives the business case, but not necessarily from, hey, we eliminated this call, it didn't need to go to an agent, it still needed to go to an agent, but hey, we were able to shave off a minute, 2 minutes of talk time, and so that's hard dollars at the end of the day.
Yeah, the authentication piece for sure, and then as you pointed out, a number of
Right.
transactions. There's some upfront data gathering that can improve that.
Absolutely.
Uh, in the last 2 years, and it is just about 2 years since ChatGPT sort of hit the world, there's been a lot of focus on what will it disrupt, and there's people who say, well, it'll disrupt the legal profession, it'll disrupt healthcare, it'll disrupt the contact center for sure. And it's caused a white hot focus of that technology in this space. So I'm sure you're feeling that both in good and bad. And on the one hand, lots of opportunity; on the other hand, lots of competition. And so that compounds with the conversation I tend to have with prospects and customers of mine, which is there's so many decisions to be made. There's so many parameters and so many things to think about around this thing. What is your top three suggestions to clients that you're not selling Omilia here? It's like if you're
Right.
thinking about this, and at your cocktail party, like, okay, just think
Yeah.
about these three things when you go into the conversation, and
Yeah.
that's a good start. What are those? What do you think those three things might be?
Yeah, so I would say, I mean, the top three, and I'll start with the first one is going to be precision and auditability. Many of the larger contact centers out there are in highly regulated industries, and even if they're not in a highly regulated industry, there is still a very hard requirement to make sure that what is being said to customers is exactly what the business and legal and all of the different stakeholders involved have approved to be said, or the messaging that they want relayed to customers. And with generative AI, I'll say sort of the nature of the beast, right, is that, and this is the main benefit of generative AI, is that it generates things real time, essentially from scratch, right? And that's great because it gives us a huge, let's say, accelerator in terms of bringing not only conversational AI, right, but as you said, all ambits of business in general. But it gives everybody sort of a supercharged sort of type of motor. But still, at the end of the day, you do need to have the ability to go to your auditors and go to your regulators and go to your infosec, and cybersecurity partners and say, yep, this is exactly what the bot said. It was approved by the business. It was not, outside of, what was approved. And so, of course, there's, the concept of hallucinations and misinformation, and how do you, sort of set up AI guardrails to make sure that, you are, let's say, on point and on brand in terms of what's being said. So I think that's the first, and I would say the biggest consideration. I think the second consideration is data security and privacy. Being able to, again, report to your cyber partners that, yep, this is where our data is going. It's not being used, to train a conglomerate of models. That's fundamentally important for, most of the largest organizations out there. So, precision, auditability, avoiding hallucinations, data security. And then, there was, I think it was maybe a year ago now, one of the folks that, subsequently left Google was saying, there's no moat when it comes to generative AI, right? There are a slew of different large language model, manufacturers, we'll call them, or vendors out there. And there's also open source, right? And so you're not, let's say, beholden to, just OpenAI, for example, in order to, provide a solution that's going to be state of the art, but also, meet the needs that we just talked about in terms of precision, auditability, data security, and all of that. So, I would say, sort of to round out that third one, there's lots of options out there, right? As you said, and, making sure that you pick an option that not only provides, the first two checkpoints, right? But also in a way that is cost effective and that fits in with your overall servicing strategy, right? If we're just focusing this conversation on customer care and not, radiology or, the things outside of, the realm there, I would say that's definitely the top three.
Excellent. We actually got a question in, and if there are other questions, I'm happy to relay them. And so this one's a little bit tricky from the standpoint of when you're thinking about AI and the advancement that it made in the last couple of years. It took off like a rocket ship. But you alluded to, in fact, in your last response about how there's no moat, I think is the way you described it. And there are parts of it that I think, I'll date myself a little bit, but at one point you had to pay for a spell checker inside your word processor. That was like an add-on type of thing. And that, that's not true anymore. And so the question is really how soon will parts of that AI component be a commodity?
If I'm being honest, I think it's already happening.
Okay.
Comparatively, I think a good example is, let's say, maybe 15 years ago, right? When you would come up with a business idea, and it was going to be wrapped around the internet, and hey, I'm going to have this new project. It's going to be, web based, and we'll have a mobile app. I mean, back in the day, that was something that was novel, right? It wasn't assumed that every new business was going to have this component to it, right?
Right.
And I think today that's ultimately where we're ending up. Is it's like, yeah, it's going to have generative AI, right? And it's just a question of how you've architect it, what pattern you're using, and the cost is, as I said, continuing to go down. So I think we're already there. And it's only going to become more accessible. I think to that point, and if we take it back to the customer care market, or the customer care or customer servicing sort of use cases, it's a lot like I could compare it to the automotive industry, right? Before there were let's say modern combustion engines, right? The folks who were best set up to take advantage of advances in in engines, or even if we take the EV market, for example, right? I mean, Tesla is certainly its own thing, but companies like GM, Ford, et cetera, they have the infrastructure already there, right? They know the automotive industry. So, they are very well posed to take advantage of this new technology in a way that, is just going to seamlessly fit into, the business that they're already doing, and allow them, to really double down on the fact that they have all of these years of, expertise in the industry in order to take advantage of this new technology and, really scale it, in a way that, that can be used by everybody.
So I'm going to interpret part of your answer to say industry does matter here in terms of specialization. Sort of that's not really where the original question was going, but in terms of a follow-up question around understanding the applicability by industry, it sounds like that's very germane.
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah. So the one last question for you, if you don't mind. It's good conversation. And oh yeah, so I got to the question before it was put on the screen, but I'm going to move on just in the interest of time. Sounds like we got a yes to that one. One of the other things that seems to be in play is you can have outstanding technology and still design it poorly. And I guess my question for you is, when does that change? When does the technology help you actually design the conversational flow and the user interface and things like that? Or are humans still going to be needed in that component? And really, people who are good at it, and everybody thinks they're good at it, and most people aren't.
Yeah. So I think you're always going to have the human layer, right? To really approve and sort of direct, right? I mean, it's the LLMs don't just work without you telling them to do something, right? You need to prompt them, you need to give them a task, right, to perform. And then I think going back to the point that I raised previously around, that sort of first and foremost important consideration around auditability and precision in terms of the types of experiences that you are putting in front of your consumers. So I think there's always going to be that layer there of human revision and approval, right? Of ultimately what is the experience that we're pushing into production or pushing into runtime, to actually interact and speak with our customers. What I can say is that we are already using large language models and generative AI to really accelerate and trim down the effort that goes into the design and the build of these types of solutions. I can say that traditionally, most of the time that our professional services teams spend on a project is not actually let's say hands on keyboards, like designing a dialogue flow, right? Or manipulating intents. A lot of the effort is spent on design and requirements gathering, talking with the customer, understanding what are the business rules, what are the business requirements that are going to ultimately dictate, if the customer says this, how does the business want to handle it, right? And then ultimately from there, what's the best way for us to complete that task or fulfill that customer request. So as I said, we are already using LLMs in that manner, right? To be able to take unstructured data, for example, human to human transcriptions from call recordings, API files, the actual API file to understand the inputs and the outputs, or of course the retrieval augmented generation use case where the idea is you just give it the PDFs and it will magically create your knowledge base for you. So I think that's certainly from our perspective and from what I've seen so far, that's where we are really reaping a lot of the value. And again, that feeds into this let's say construct or requirement of needing to know that whatever you're putting into production is not something that's going to change from what you tested, right? And that ultimately is, I think, what's hugely important. But I guess just to go back to the top of the question, as I said, I think there's always going to be the human layer, right? Because we need to protect the brand interest. We need to, make sure with our, our legal departments, et cetera, that what we're saying is, acceptable from that perspective.
Outstanding. So I have 75 more questions. Perhaps we'll do that in the spring on round 2 of this. And good to know that from a design standpoint, my consultative skills may still have some use in this. Quinn, it's been delightful talking to you today. Thank you for the insights around the way you're seeing the market. And for everybody joining us today, if you got any questions about Omilia, obviously reach out to Quinn, or of course, you can reach out to me and we'll make the connection happen. So thanks everybody and have a happy Halloween. Be safe out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.